joining us this afternoon. My name is Lauren Williams. I'm one of the Adult and Community Services Managers for the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn, the last one of 2021. Today's presentation of the Boone County Jail Data Analysis is co-hosted by the library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. And now I'd like to welcome our moderator, League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County President Barbara Hoppe. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to the Daniel Boone Regional Library for continuing to co-host these Lunch and Learn programs. Today, our guest Lunch and Learn speaker is retired University of Missouri professor Jean Mahal, and she will present her analysis of publicly available data from the Boone County Jail. And she looked for patterns in the data, people charged, types of charges, to see what equities and inequities might be revealed. And just to tell you a little bit more about Jean, she worked as a MU faculty member for 30 years in the Division of Plant Sciences, and in a position split among research, teaching, and administration. And then in 2019, she began to reach out to the community and explore options for getting further engaged in the community. And since then, she's been involved with Race Matters, Friends Community Bail Bond, or Community Bail Fund, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. And she's also been active in canvassing for local elections and working to increase voter participation. So welcome, Jean. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. If at some point you can't hear me, somebody let me know and I'll see what I can do to fix it. And I thank both Barbara and Lauren for helping with the slides. That on my little iPad mini, I can't seem to make that work. So as Barbara said, I'm speaking today in my role of as a member, a volunteer of the Race Matters Friends Community Bail Fund. I know that Peggy Plaisir from the Bail Fund spoke to the League of Women Voters group about a year ago or so. And I'm going to be sort of building on what she told you. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Let's see. So I'm going to start with what Peggy already told you, and then I want to talk a little bit about what kind of data are available for us to understand who's incarcerated in the Boone County Jail. And then from that, once we've sort of looked at what type of data we can examine, I want to focus on some of the first questions that our data team in the Boone County, in the Bail Fund asked, and we were curious about things like who is in the jail? Does the population of incarcerated people look like the population at large, the population from which it's drawn? And if not, how do they differ? We wanted to understand why people are incarcerated, what kinds of charges they face. And then as we dug into the data and started understanding something about it, we came up with other questions. And what I want to focus on today is how long are people incarcerated? Okay, and then at the end, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about how you could help and get involved with the Community Bail Fund if this work is interesting to you. And then I want to open it up for questions. Next slide, please. Okay. So when Peggy was here, one of the things that she told you is that we're all volunteers in the Community Bail Fund. Nobody takes any money for anything. We take calls from people who are currently incarcerated in the Boone County Jail. Sometimes we also get calls from their friends and relatives asking for assistance. We always pay total bail. We don't pay a portion. We're not a bail bond company. So, and our limit is $3,000 per detainee because that's as much money as we can raise. All of our money comes from donations from people like you. Our clients are Boone County residents, and that is in part because we just can't handle people from further away, because one of the first things we do after bailing people out is we give them a ride home or wherever they want to go in Boone County. And so asking people to drive, all the way across the state is more than we can expect from our volunteers. We also follow up with our clients with things like reminders about their court dates, because the Community Bail Fund is a revolving fund. And our approach is that if someone can complete their case, however it turns out, then the bail that we paid will be refunded to us, and we could use that money to get somebody else out of jail. Okay, next slide, please. So the Boone County Jail collects information about their detainees, and they release it in two ways. And those two are shown in these columns. On the left-hand column is something called the 7 a.m. report, which, as the name suggests, is recorded at 7 a.m. every morning. And it records everyone who was booked into the jail in the previous 24 hours. And so each detainee will appear once on the 7 a.m. report within the 24 hours after they're booked. And it contains some interesting data. And among the things in the data are, of course, the name, the street address of the person, their gender, their birth date, the description of charges, and then the bond amount. And the description of charges, so 13 different entities can take people to the Boone County Jail for booking. And the way they describe charges is not uniform. I'll circle back to that in a little bit. Okay, so that's one source of data. The other source of data in the right-hand column is what we call our current detainee, what they call the current detainee. And that changes throughout and a person's name appears in the current detainees as long as they are held in the jail, so over multiple days. Okay, and even though these are data from the same entity, they're not all the same data. The name, of course, is there, but they don't include the street address. They include only the city. They include gender, age, date of birth date, and they include race. This is the only place we can find about the racial characterization of each detainee. The charges and the bond are also available from these sources. So within the Bail Fund community of volunteers, we have a couple of people with really good IT and database skills. That's not me. And every day, at the same time every day, they capture whatever is available from these two reports. And we now have one full year, 365 days worth of data from these two sources. The analyses I want to talk about today are based on either 6-month or 9-month data sets. These are things that I've worked on over the past year. Okay, let's see. May I have the next slide, please? Where am I? There I am. Okay, so I want to focus in now on some of the questions that we asked. And I'm going to take a little bit of extra time with this first graph because I want to make sure that the way I set it up is clear to everybody. So the first question the group wanted to know is who is in jail? Does the community of detainees reflect the community from which it's drawn? And so this graph illustrates, if we look at it on the left-hand side, it is the percentage of detainees from 0 to 100. And then we have the gender of detainees with females coded as orange and males coded as light green. And so if you want to ask, is the jail population reflecting the community, you need to figure out what the community population is, what would be the distribution. And not surprisingly, that's our right-hand column, and it's about 50-50. And we can get precise percentages by using the 2010 census data. The 2020 census data were only recently released. So wherever I'm using census data and talking about that, that's 2010 data. Okay, so the right-hand column is what we would expect. The left-hand column is what we find among the current detainees. Okay? And what we find is that women are only 20% of the current detainees and men are 80%. And that's a huge difference. And when I told I tell some people that, they go, well, yeah, of course. But my reaction is, why is it that disparate? Why is it that different? So this is an example of the kind of question we can ask. And this is the way I'm going to show the next couple of graphs. So I'm going to do one more and then I'm going to pause for questions. May I have the next slide, please? So one of the questions posed early on by our bail fund volunteers was, is there a difference in the way different racial groups are represented in the population of Boone County Jail detainees compared to the community at large? Again, in the right-hand stack of colors, we have what we would expect. Orange represents Black African-American detainees. The light green represents white detainees or white people. And the purple represents all other racial groups. So that's Asian, Hispanic, Indigenous, and so on. The right-hand bar is what we have in Columbia. And this is drawn from 2010 census data. 10.6% of Columbia residents in 2010 were Black. If we look at the left-hand bar, this is the population of current detainees. 39.6% of detainees in the Boone County Jail are Black. That's a huge disparity. Okay. And it suggests that there is, some sort of disparate focus of law enforcement that results in this kind of disparity. Questions so far? If you want to ask me anything.
I don't see any in the chat.
Okay, that's fine. I want to keep going then. So the data set I used for this graph was the current detainees, that is people who are held in jail, possibly for multiple days. I wanted to look at the bookings because there are many people who are not held very long, and that represents more people, more possible cases that we could look at. So I looked at the 7 a.m. report to look at differences to look at who is in jail. And I'd like to look at the next slide, please. Okay. So the 7 a.m. report doesn't contain data about race, even though it's from the Boone County Jail, and the Boone County Jail is clearly collecting those data, but there it is. So what I decided to do was look at differences. I decided to look at differences by geographic location within Columbia. Are there differences across the city in who is incarcerated? Okay, and in order to do that, I used the street addresses, which in the data set are not given with zip code. So I went through and used Google Maps essentially to look up every single street address and get every single zip code. And in Columbia, we have 3 zip codes. 65202 is north of Interstate 70. 65201 is south of Interstate 70 and east of Providence. Zip code 65203 is south of Interstate 70 and west of Providence. So if you'd like take a second to sort of think about those 3 regions. The right-hand stack bars where 65201 is orange, 65202 north of the interstate is light green, and 65203 is purple. In our right-hand stack of bars, this is the population in each of those 3 zip codes using the 2010 census data. And they're pretty similar. If we look at the left-hand stack of bars, we have the number of people from each zip code in the population of detainees using the booking data. And what we see is that the middle color, the light green, 65202 north of the freeway, is very overrepresented compared to the other 2 areas. And if we look further in the census data, we find that in 65202, 14.7% of the residents are Black, and that's higher than the other two zip codes. So this is another piece of evidence that suggests that there's disparate focus across the community by law enforcement on men, on Black people, and on people north of the freeway. Okay, are there questions?
Yes, yes, Jean. There's a question. Is there any other comparable community in which males and females are equally represented in jail or prison?
That's a wonderful question, and I do not have data. Then I'm not going to speculate. My role so far, I've been part of the bail fund group for a little over a year, and the first task that they were interested in having me work on was just looking at our local jails data. I'm really nervous about data-free speculation. And so I don't know, but that would be a really fascinating question to answer. And I suspect that data are available from other communities, because nationally there are, well, I know there's more than 100 bail funds nationally, part of the National Bail Fund Network, of which we are a member. And so I'm sure, pardon me, that those kinds of data exist. I apologize for not having them. Other questions?
No, I think that's it for now.
Okay, may I have the next
Oh, wait,
slide?
no, there is another question. Does the average income differ between the zip code areas?
Yes, it does. And I could dig that out. I dug through some of that. And it wasn't what you think. The 65202 had a higher median income than, I think it was 65201. But I would have to dig those data out. That is available in the census data.
That might include the students, 65201.
Founding when you look across location, because we do have several very concentrated areas of students. You're right. Okay, good. So from that first several analyses, we realized that the population of people held in pretrial incarceration in the Boone County Jail doesn't reflect the community. So the next large question that was asked by the bail fund members is, why are people incarcerated? And so to answer that, I'm sort of coming back to what I alluded to earlier. There are many different agencies, local police departments within Boone County, the Boone County Sheriff's Department, the Columbia Police, the MU Police Department, like Ashland Police, Hallsville, and so on, all of whom will bring people for incarceration to the Boone County Jail. And they're not consistent in the way they record charges. And so it took us on the data team some time to understand what kinds of charges are being brought and to come up with an analytical approach. And so what we came up with was 5 categories of charges that seemed to give us a way to ask some broad brush questions. And I want to just summarize that briefly here with this slide. So our 5 categories are drug charges, property charges, something we call rules and procedures, traffic, and violent. So just giving you just a few examples from each category. Under drug charges, we included DWI, or driving while intoxicated, possession, which could be for a small or a large amount of a controlled substance, distribution or manufacturing of drugs, and possession of paraphernalia. Those are the most common. Property is a very broad category of charges. It includes burglary, larceny, stealing. It includes forgery, credit card fraud, and other kinds of fraud. It includes leaving the scene of an accident, because typically that charge is brought when there's damage from someone who left the scene of an accident. Okay, so that's a property crime. There's straight up property damage. Somebody is accused of damaging something belonging to somebody else. And trespassing, which I want to circle back to here in a bit. So we'll leave that one sit for a moment. Under rules and procedures, then we had those are charges that aren't specific, where someone is not specifically accused of action against property or action against another human, but it's violating a rule. And for example, DUS, DUR is very common, and this is driving under a suspended license or driving under a revoked license. No, failure to provide proof of insurance is a common one. Failure to have either current plates or current tags on a vehicle is another one. Tail light out is another one. And there are many, many charges. Failure to properly secure a seatbelt. I'm going to come back to resisting arrest because we included that, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Okay. So then under traffic charges, there weren't very many, which was actually very surprising to us. It includes things like careless driving, it includes speeding, and there's all sorts of level of speeding, failure to stop at a stoplight, failure to signal lane change, moving violations. Under violent, this is where the alleged behavior is physically targeting another human. And ACA is armed criminal action. Assault can be, there are many levels and types of assault. Domestic violence and domestic assault are two related sorts of charges, and there are levels of those. Kidnapping and child endangerment, there are a number of charges in that kind of category. We included stalking and harassment in this group because even though it might not involve physical contact of one human to another, it still seemed to us like that was the best fit for those sorts of charges, making broad categories. UUW is unlawful use of a weapon. Okay, so those are our 5 categories. And if I could have the next slide, please. I wanted first to look just broadly at how frequent or infrequent these various types of charges are. So to explain this graph a little bit, we have on the left-hand side the number of charges in the data set. And I've divided the charges by the zip code, the residence of each of the detainees. And there's 4 columns here, the 3 zip codes that I already mentioned. And then the last column on the right is for our unsheltered residents, because we do have a number of our clients for sure. And there are a number of people who are detained who are unhoused. And then the code, the orange is drug related, that's at the bottom. And the next one in the stack of colors is light green, the property related charges. The light purple is the rules and procedures we talked about. The little narrow dark brown red color is traffic, and the top part of each stack is violent. And if you just let your eyes sort of wash across that graph, there's 2 things that should stand out, that stand out to me. One is that violent charges are not all that common. Most of each stack is something other than violent charges. And then the second piece is that the stack for zip code 65202 north of the freeway, even though there's 33% of Columbia residents live in 65202, you have 49% of the charges filed. So again, this strongly suggests to me that there's inequitable and targeted policing going on. Okay, I'd like to dig deeper and then I'll pause for questions. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'd like to focus in on the violence charges. So I was asked by the members of the bail fund if there was a racial component to violence charges. And so how do you answer that question? Well, I've already demonstrated that we have evidence that Black people are more likely to be held in the Boone County Jail than white people. And in the right-hand column on this graph, this is the proportion of current detainees in each racial category. So this represents, that right-hand column represents the overrepresentation of Black people and the underrepresentation of white people already. The left-hand column looks at the distribution of violence charges for the three racial categories. And so the difference between those two stacks of bars suggests the orange bar is higher, is larger for the Black people incarcerated facing violence charges, meaning there's more violence charges for Black detainees compared with white detainees after already accounting for the overrepresentation. And I would be happy, I saw some kind of question flashed. Could somebody, I would be happy
to. Yes, the question is, does inequitable targeting become a self-fulfilling situation if the expectation of crime is in a particular area and more law enforcement is looking for it?
That is precisely my question. You know, are you seeing what you expect to see because you're looking where you expect to see it? And that was something I presented some of these data to the city council in one of those early, before, you know, the early part of the city council meetings, bringing up some of these issues to them, because ultimately the Columbia Police Department answers to the city council through their hiring of the police chief and so on. Yeah, that's a really good question. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is the same kind of analysis, but looking at drug charges. Okay, so the bar on the right is the same, the proportion of the different racial groups of current detainees. And what we see here is that the Black detainees face fewer drug charges than the white detainees relative to their proportion of the population in the Boone County Jail. So there's differences among types of charges. May I have the slide, please? Okay, now I'm going to circle back to resisting arrest. And before I talk about this graph, I need to talk about a little bit about some of my experience in bailing people out. So when you go out to the jail and you pay the bail to the guy behind the bulletproof glass window, you sit outside and you wait for a while, and then the person that you've bailed out comes out and we give them a ride. And since the most bail that we can pay as a community bail fund is $3,000, we often get people who are facing fairly low level charges, things like possessing small quantities of drugs, stealing items of low value, driving with a revoked license, that kind of thing. We also have a number of unsheltered clients, and there are a number of them who face trespassing charges because they sleep in public parks. And if you sleep in a public park after hours, you can be arrested for trespassing, even if you have nowhere else to go. And what I've heard from people who get trespassing charges and may often have a resisting arrest charge with it, resisting arrest doesn't necessarily mean a physical fight, although it could. But it can also mean something like the police officer wakes you up and says, hey, you know, you got to move on or I'm going to arrest you. And a person says, wait, that's not fair. That's resisting arrest. If an officer goes to put handcuffs on somebody and somebody flinches, that can be interpreted as aggression and they can be charged with resisting arrest. So with those stories in mind from people I've talked to, and that's an unscientific survey, that's just the folks I bailed out. I wanted to ask if there is a racial difference in resisting arrest charges. And so this graph has the same format as the prior graphs. And indeed, Black people face more resisting arrest charges than do white people based on their proportion of people in Boone County Jail. And I see that there was a question and it flashed on my screen and went away.
Yeah. It says, the question is, given the growth of Columbia in the past decade, is there a plan to review these important analyses with 2020 census data in the coming months?
The short answer is I would love to do that. One of the things I want to do is, now that I've got full year data sets, I want to go and I want to code them all. I'm also as a bail fund team, we have a data team. And so we talk about what are the most important questions we need to be answering right now. I'm also sitting on the City Council Redistricting Committee for changing our ward boundaries. And so having taken a peek at 2020 data, there's surprisingly little difference in proportions of various racial groups. I don't know about geographic differences yet. I haven't had a chance to delve into that, but I would love to do that. Okay. May I have the next slide, please? Okay. So having dug into who's there and why are they there, one of the things that was posed from within the bail fund group is like, well, how long are people there? And we can address that with the current detainee data set, because a person's name appears for every day that they're held in pretrial detention, right? And so with a 9-month data set, I separated out those people who began their incarceration and ended it within the data set period. And then I divided it up by race and by charge type. And so that's what this graph is about. And on the left, on the vertical scale, we have the average number of days detained for 4 of the charge groups. And I don't have traffic charges because there just aren't that many. People don't end up in Boone County Jail very often on just plain moving violation charges. And what we can see then is that for drug charges and for violent charges, the orange bar representing the Black African-American detainees is significantly more. And in fact, they are held 8 days longer on average, than are white detainees for the same types of charges. And I think that is something that really needs attention. Well, that's a question that I think needs to be addressed. Why is that? Okay. May I have the next slide, please?
And there is another question if you want it.
Yes, please.
The question is it possible to control for socioeconomic status or other variables that might account for the differences as a way of strengthening the association with differences in policing practices?
That's a really good question. And I think one thing we could do using the booking data from the 7 a.m. report would be to focus on characterizing at a smaller geographic area. And we can do that with census data because the census data use something called a census block, which is sometimes, depending on how dense the population is, it could be as small as a city block. So, and we can get at median income, household size, renter versus owner. There's a number of census features that would allow us to characterize a geographic area beyond these publicly available data from the jail. We can, there's another publicly available data set called CaseNet, and that records by case number and incarcerated person name cases from all across the state of Missouri. And it's stunning how much data about people are available, but a lot of it's cryptic. It takes, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a biologist. So it would take some real work with somebody who's more conversant with the legal system to help ferret out some information. But ultimately, we don't have, as a matter of public record, people's, if they're employed, who their employer is, how much they make, if they have children, how many are the children living with them, all of the kinds of detail-y things that I think maybe you're thinking about that would be incredibly informative if we could get it. It would take a lot of digging to get at that. Just going through the charges and coming up with ways to categorize them in our full in our full year's data set. I think I have 9,000 charge lines. And so any manipulation of that data set requires me to work through all of those charge lines in order to reach it some kind of meaningful analysis. That's an excellent question.
And there is another question. Have you talked at all with the press? Are you seeking or hoping for any news coverage about this issue?
Okay, so that's a wonderful question. So in the bail fund, we're a wonderful group of people. I just love everybody who's in there because we're so different. We've got a range of ages from young to old. We've got men and women. We've got, people from all kinds of educational and professional backgrounds. And we have one member who really is good at that public facing sort of discussion. I'm comfortable going and talking to city council in kind of a formal, lecture-y kind of way. I don't have a lot of skill in speaking with the press. And so those kinds of communications, we have people who are good at that, who are working on that, but that's not me. And then I think I saw Dee Doken posted something really fast in there about how race is determined. I think race is assigned by the Boone County Jail staff, because the reason I hypothesized that is because I've had a number of people as I've worked through this data set where somebody is arrested, say 3 times and booked 3 times over a 9-month period. And I can tell it's the same person because the same birthday shows up, right? And the same address shows up, but the race changes. Sometimes they're white, sometimes they're Hispanic, and that's the one that seems to change. So I'm guessing it's whatever the assumption is of the person booking them into the jail. I don't know that. The disparity would suggest that. It's a good question. So I just wanted to make a plug for helping us out. If you or someone you know is able to donate money, we can always use that. And yes, we are currently in Como. Was it Como Gives? And we would appreciate every dollar somebody can come up with, because it's a difference between getting somebody out and not. We would love to have people volunteer if they want to volunteer with us. You can find out what we're doing on our webpage or on liking our Facebook page. You can call us. And since these slides will be available, you can get all this information off there. Could I have the last slide, please? Yeah. So for us, as I said, as a community of volunteers, we really want to figure out how to use the data to reduce incarceration, to educate the community about pretrial incarceration. I mean, when I started this in the summer of 2020, I had no idea how bail worked, why people were in jail, who was in jail. I was just floored as I got involved with this group. It was amazing. It is amazing. And then we want to figure out how we can get more people free to end cash bail, because that's our goal. And with that, I would be delighted to answer any questions or entertain any ideas that anybody wants to discuss. And if you want to
first, let's see. Okay. Oh, first, there's a thank you for taking the time to develop this data set and sharing it with us. Very interesting information. I had a question also. I was wondering if it would be helpful and if you could do another, break the data down according to ward. So even further, to give ward representatives more information about people in their ward.
Well, that's a good idea. For the 7 a.m. data, that would be possible. I've actually got the big 3 foot by 3 foot ward map that I have from the redistricting work. Yeah, it would take a little bit of work to like get that down to that sort of level, but that's a good. Ooh, thank you for that. Good suggestion.
And then there's another question. Sorry if I missed it. What was the total number of cases analyzed or looked at?
It depends on which slide we're looking at, because I've done this work over a period of months. And so some of it is 6-month data and some of it is 9-month data. But in any set, the number of incarcerated people is generally several thousand, and the number of, on average, the average incarcerated person faces 1.8 to 2.2 charges per person. So the number of people times that would give you about the number of charges that I look at. So it's thousands of charges in any particular data set. And we need that many in order to be able to have enough to divide them into meaningful categories.
So can you say for your 6-month data set, about how many cases were there versus the 9-month? Just off the top of your head, you know, just generally.
I hate doing the top of my head. The data freak in me just goes, no, you can't do that. I can get it.
Yeah.
You okay?
And we'll share it.
Yeah,
I will get to
the number in the 6 and 9 months, but it makes me cringe to think of giving you something inaccurate.
Yeah, that was Monica Lee who asked that question. Another question I had was, did you have any thoughts about contacting the public defender system and seeing what data, you know, generalized data they have on, because they get most of the indigents, you know, low income people.
We have not. I am not aware that our group has done that. We certainly haven't done it since I've been part of the group. One of the members has a spouse who is a lawyer, and that would be, I guess we could begin a query that way. Like, how would we go about doing that? And I don't know what they would be able to release as a non-lawyer. I assume there's all sorts of privilege around.
Yeah, they might have aggregate data. That's a good individual for sure. There's another question, which is, what is the average bail amount for people? Okay. Do you know that?
That's really tough. So an average, you know, you add up all the values and you divide by the number of observations. But where people are in the current detainees pool, we have people for whom no bail is set. And the bail is, and it's not, that would be for a murder case. There is no bail.
Right.
And federal things, like if somebody is in ICE detention, there will not be a bail. And then the other thing about an average is it works as a measure of central tendency if there's like a bell-shaped curve distribution, but there are a few charges, like the assault one, domestic violence one, when you have a suite of charges, armed criminal action with unauthorized use of a weapon with some kind of assault charge, that person is going to have a really high bail. You might have a small number of bails in the 100,000, 200,000, 500,000. And if you average those with a whole slug of bails that are less than 2,000, you get an average, but that isn't as meaningful as looking at a distribution, like a little graph that lists the bails across the x-axis and tells you how many times that occurs. So yes, I can come up with an average, but that's not, I think, the most informative way to look at that.
Or what might be helpful is looking at it by race and charges, and then seeing if the bail is equitable or
right, and that
or if there's disparities there.
the thing that, and I fiddled with that, and one of the problems that I come up with is you have people who face 1 or 2 charges, and then you have some people who have the same charges, but maybe they have 8 or 10 or 12 charges, and it looks like the judge gives them a bail on maybe 6 of the 12 charges and not on the other 6. But had those charges been separate, like two of the 6, they would have had a bail. I haven't figured out a way to get at that seems to me that would give you the kind of clear-cut answer that you're looking for there. A really, really good question, and much harder than I thought it would be.
Okay, thanks. There's more questions now. People are thinking. The question is, has this data been presented to the police department?
Only in the sense that when I've spoken to the city council, there are police present. But as a formal presentation to the police department, no.
And then we have someone who said, this information is very helpful. I work with reentry and family reunification in a Texas program under a federal grant I worked for 11 years. I conduct a workshop and do counseling in the jail system and now on Zoom. Our data collection is a joint effort through the University of North Texas. So I guess maybe the question is there any plans to work with the university further? Is there any?
We have contact. There's a new postdoctoral scholar who is jointly appointed through the Department of Geography and the Department of Women and Gender Studies, Dr. Gulen Kozi. And she has joined the bail fund. She's a community geographer, and she has been able to suggest some insights and the way to connect census data, in fact. So there is a possibility of doing some really meaningful work with her going forward. She joined the university in August of 21, I think. And so we have the beginning of a partnership, I guess I'd say.
Great. There's a comment: in public health, we use the median number instead of the mean in such cases. You want to comment on that?
And that's still, we have something that is as non-normal. I mean, certainly you could look at the difference between the median and the mean and see which way those high bails are pulling. You know, you get something from that. But I think coming up with a distribution, like curve fitting exercise, would probably be more meaningful. And I just haven't done that yet.
Okay, another question. I think I'll add one with it. How many detainees have you bailed out and how many have returned?
Okay, so, oh boy, that's a really sad question. So the group started bailing people out in 2019, and we had like 30 or so people, I think, bailed out in the first year. And then in 2020, they bailed out like, I want to say like 42 or something like that. And this year, in the last few months, have been crazy. Instead of one bail a week, maybe one every other week, or in a couple sometimes, we had one day where we had 6 requests in one day. The number of people per week now over the last 8 weeks has just been stunning. We're up to 60. I think when I looked this morning, I do the reminders. That's another part that I do. I want to see, we're up to 63 or 64 at this point, and we've still got a couple weeks to go.
And I think part of that question then was, are there people that are returnees? You know, you bail them out more than once for
Yes,
different.
there are people that we bailed out more than once. We have another thing I love about this group of people is we make decisions about policies through discussion and consensus. And so we have our meetings and we talk about things like, okay, how many times can we bail out one person versus giving other people a chance? What do we do when we run out of money? You know, can we afford to look at greater boundaries? So we have talked about that, and there is a policy, don't have it in front of me, that we will not bail somebody out more than, I think it's 3 times in a certain time period. Just, yeah,
Okay.
people who end up right back in jail, some of them.
Yeah, that's helpful. Another question. What is the range of bail, the smallest bail that might keep someone in jail?
I've seen people held because they couldn't come up with $100.
Wow.
I think one of the things that is just, oh, thank you, Peggy. She put the number of people in 34, 45, and 60, whatever it was, and it went out of my screen. Yes. Yeah. I think the thing that's really frustrating is that for some people, they can't come up with, say, $250 to get out, and they're held for days pre-trial. Before trial, you're supposed to be presumed innocent, and you're being held in jail because you can't come up with $250. Well, yeah, make that make sense to me.
Right. That's why your group is so crucial and important. There's another question. Do you know if there is any focus on criminal justice reform in Columbia Boone County? This data would be meaningful to those efforts.
I'm not sure I'm not sure what you mean by criminal justice reform. If you're speaking about a legislative effort, an ordinance level effort by a government, or advocacy groups, I'm sorry.
It's a general question, right?
Oh,
right. There's all levels.
I'm not the right person to ask that.
Yeah, for example, Boone County was a leader in doing mental health courts and mental health reform, you know, and keeping people out of jail or redirecting them. So it's a pretty big question. So can't expect you to know the answer to that one, but it's a good question. Let's see, there's more questions. Peggy had mentioned that there are a few people who abscond, so you have to forfeit the bail money you posted, and someone else asked, is there any recourse for those who abscond? I guess, do you get some of the money back, maybe?
If the question is failure to appear, I guess that's the way I understand it. Abscond to me means, and I may be quite off here, it means you've physically left a jurisdiction and people failed to appear for the same prosaic reasons that people miss dentist appointments. You didn't have a ride, you had a kid homesick, you couldn't get time off of your job. And so people failed to appear in court, and the consequences, depending on the judge and how they feel about this, can be brutal. A warrant is put out, and the warrant for arrest for failing to appear in court can have a bail associated with it that's far higher than the original bail that was posted. And we encourage people when we pick them up and then bail them out, we go, okay, if you can't be there, here is the number you call at the county clerk's office, and you make sure that you tell them that you can't be there and see if the judge will reschedule something so that you don't get a failure to appear warrant. Because if people end up with a couple of failure to appear warrants, it ends up being more money than we can pay for one person. It escalates really fast, which is, again, just unbelievably cruel, I think.
So it sounds like there's not only do you bail out people, but you give them some direction and to stay out of further problems during the process. Yes.
Okay, there's Peggy's answer. No course for failure. And it went out.
No recourse for failure to appear.
No. And yeah.
And then we have time for one more question. And so that is, does this data include juveniles?
No. No, unless someone is, well, okay, let me temper that just a little bit. If someone is like, I don't know what the threshold is in this state, but let's say they're 17 or 18. I've seen MUPD bring book people who are underage drinking below less than 18, and they're booked. And so but that's very rare that I see people underage in the data set.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Jean, and thank you for the Race Community Bail Fund for doing this work and presenting it to us. And people can help by getting involved and donating to, it's the Race Matters Friends Community Bail Fund, or some version of that on Como Gives, which is available through December 31st. Is there any parting words you'd like to say, Jeannie?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I really appreciate it. We all do.
And we'll look forward to getting a follow-up if you do more research down the line. And I did want to let people know that our next Lunch and Learn program is January 11th. And Fred Williams III from the Men's Minority Network will be giving us an update on the work that they're doing and how people can help and get involved with that. Thank you so much for everyone who has attended. And again, this will be on YouTube, so you can share it with other people. Really important data and information. Thank you for all your volunteer work on this.
Thank you so much.
Have a joyous and safe holiday.